Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Caitlin Weiler, and I work for the Northwestern Alumni Association. We'll begin shortly, and I'm so pleased that Deborah Frank could join us for this webinar. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping items to go over. If you have any questions now or during the presentation that you would like to ask, please feel free to use the Q&A box in your webinar dashboard. Just type in your question and hit send. Deborah will be answering your questions at the end of the presentation, but you can submit your questions as they come to mind. Deborah will also be encouraging some engagement via the chat, so keep an eye out for those prompts. Should you have any technical issues during the webinar, try closing out the Zoom window and restarting using the same registration link from your email or refreshing your browser. Most issues tend to be Wi-Fi related. Lastly, a link to the recording of this webinar will be sent to all registrants after this talk. Deborah will also be sharing her slides and following up with any questions that we may not have gotten to today. Now I'm going to go ahead and introduce Deborah. Deborah Frank has an extensive experience helping individuals assess their strengths and make career and life choices. She opened her career coaching practice, Career Transitions, in 2000. From 2011 to 2024, she provided career support to alumni at LaSalle University and developed programs and events that brought alumni and students together for career engagement. Frank is a member and former board member of the Pennsylvania Career Development Association, where she focused on technology and volunteer engagement. She has a BS in engineering from Northwestern and an MA in counseling from Biblical Missio Seminary. And now I'm going to hand it over. Thank you so much for being here, Deborah.
All right, thank you so much, Caitlin. It's a pleasure to be with my fellow Northwestern grads today. We're going to dive right in here. There is so much information out there about the job search, how to do it, tips and tricks, and you just scroll your videos, do a Google search, and you're probably overwhelmed with too much information. But we're going to focus not on how to do a job search, how to do your resume, LinkedIn, salary negotiation, all that kind of stuff. We're going to focus on the internal transition that's part of every job search. So our agenda for today, we're going to do a quick poll at the beginning that Caitlin's going to manage for us. We're going to talk about the concepts of change and transition. We're going to talk about the phases of transition and then strategies for managing the job search transition. So Caitlin, let's go ahead and do the poll. Okay, so if you could select one of these that best applies to your current employment situation. I'm assuming we have a mix. We're going to find out soon if we do. All right, we do have a mix. Look at that. So pretty currently employed, seeking a new role, considering a new role. And then underemployed, so currently working, but feeling like the job isn't using all of you and you're not growing how you'd like. Between jobs or unemployed. I don't like that word unemployed, which is why I tend to use the phrase between jobs. Returning to the workforce after a career break, and that career break could be for any number of reasons. And then the mysterious other. So thank you so much for your responses there. And we are now going to move into the gist of what we're going to talk about today. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about is based on the work of William Bridges. In 1980, he wrote a book called Transitions, Making Sense of Life Choices. He updated this in 2004 on the 25th anniversary of the initial publication. William Bridges died in 2013, and his wife updated the book then in 2019 on the 40th anniversary of the initial publication. Bridges has written several other books, one of which is called Managing Change, which is about how to manage change in organizations. So that might interest some of you. And I don't remember when I first read this book, to be honest with you. It was quite a while ago. It is one of the few books that I have read several times. And I guess that's because, life is a series of changes and transitions. And I just have found what he says about transition to be so helpful for me personally. And so that's why we're talking about it today. One of the key concepts in his book is that there is a difference between change and transition. So change is the external event. So you move to a new place to live, birth or adoption of a child, diagnosis of a chronic health condition. These are all external events. Transition is what goes on inside the person. It's the internal or inner reorientation. It's almost like you have to redefine who you are in the context of that particular change. So it's a self-redefinition that you have to go through in order to incorporate the change into your life. It happens frequently throughout your life because there are all kinds of changes that occur, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. So it's a natural process of disorientation and reorientation. Now, one way to think about changes, some of them are anticipated. So these are things we expect to happen, right? So there's some changes that will happen just in the lifespan of most individuals. Graduating high school in our country, that is a change, okay, an external event that most people will experience. Other ones might be getting married or starting a job. So these are things we can anticipate happening. The thing about an anticipated change is you know it's coming, and therefore the transition, what goes on inside you, begins before the change actually occurs. Let's say you make the decision to move to another state or another country, like I did earlier in my career. You know that move is coming, and you have lots of time to prepare for it. Yes, lots of lists and packing and deciding what to take and what not to, all that, right? But there's also the internal reorientation, and you have time for that. The transition then also continues after the change. You've made that move to a new place and you are acclimating to it. You're getting used to being there for it to feel like home. It takes time. My own experience is it takes 1 to 2 years. And so the transition leading up to it, the actual event, and then the transition after. So other changes are unanticipated. They're not expected. We don't know they're going to happen until they happen. Death of a family member, particularly if it's a sudden death, okay? Being laid off when you had no clue that was coming, okay? An unexpected inheritance. Don't we wish all of us could have that change in our life, okay? Here's the key thing about an unanticipated change. The transition, the inner reorientation, doesn't begin, it can't begin until the change happens. So with the anticipated, you've got time to prepare internally. Unanticipated, you don't, because you don't know it's, how could you be prepared? You didn't know it was coming. So do you see the difference there between having time to prepare internally and not having time to prepare? So let's talk a little more about change. And we're going to use the chat here, okay? Think about some changes you have experienced in your life. Again, keeping in mind these are external events that required some amount of internal adjustment. Just go ahead and put those in the chat. Okay, so Katie, thank you. Lost a job. Oh, okay. So there's a big change going from a live music production job to a desk job. Job loss due to company closing. Another job loss due to Doge. Health changes, marriage, moving, yep. Mm-hmm. Graduate, we're going to talk about graduating. Changing career fields, yes, that's one I can relate to. Health incident, divorce, yes. Career break, mm-hmm. Changing state, engagement. A parent passing away that you were a caregiver for. Big transition associated with that. Yes. Closing your own business. Wow. Yeah. Starting your own practice. Okay. This is great. Going from a strategy role to a role where I was dependent on others. Yes. Yes. So you had to change how you thought about the work you were doing as well as how you did it. So these are all super, super examples. Thank you so much. So let's take a look. Here's a few that I thought of. So some of the ones you mentioned are here. You know, if we took the time, we could probably come up with a list of 200, right? So for each of these, right, we could talk about, was it anticipated or unanticipated? And what was the internal transition that took place as part of it? So we're going to pick one of these as an example. And so here we have college graduation. All right. So we're all alumni. So at some point, okay, maybe a long time ago, maybe more recently, we graduated. Okay. So presumably this is something the student is expecting. Okay. So it's anticipated. And so the transition actually begins before the actual moment of graduation. Okay. And the transition continues afterwards. So what's going on inside someone prior to graduation? Go ahead and use the chat. Okay, some anxiety, excitement, and nervousness. What's my next new move? So starting to ask questions. Yep. Anticipation of what will come. Yeah. So trying to picture what that'll look like. Anticipation and fear, celebration and uncertainty. See these mix of emotions that people experience, right? Finishing on near term, impact on relationships, location, all these questions that start coming up, right? Do I want to stay local? Am I open to relocating, etc.? What do I need to do in order to finish? What am I going to do after that? Um, so yes, beginning to think about how is being an employee going to be different from being a student? I'm going to be in the work. Maybe I have had some a summer job or an internship, whatever. And so I kind of know what it's like to be in a work environment like I'm going to have when I graduate. But there's still a lot of questions about relating to the kind of people that you're going to have in the work environment. All right. Thank you again for your thoughts there. So let's ask the question. Once someone graduates, okay, and let's say they move into their first job post-graduation, what's going on inside? What's still continuing in terms of the transition after when that's happened? So now we're talking about the internal reorientation is still continuing, even though the change, the graduation and first job have occurred. So go ahead and use the chat. Think about your own experience. Okay, adjustment, yep, adapting to new responsibilities, coworkers' schedule, exactly, yeah. So if you're used to, intentionally not scheduling a class earlier than 11 a.m. and suddenly you have to be at work at 8:30 every day, right? You have to figure out how to make that happen. New social situation, new responsibilities. Yes, some people really thrive in college, with having just lots of people around them all the time. And then suddenly they find themselves both in their living situation, their work situation, with a much smaller group of people. And so they have to make adjustments and figure out what's important to them. Asking questions, was this the right choice? When will I know if it's the right choice, right? I don't want to leave too soon, but I don't want to stay too long. An example for myself, my first job out of college, I started at the beginning of the summer, and that was all exciting to start a new job and move through the year. And I'm coming up on the second summer, and I go through that, and then something very strange was going on inside of me as I approached September. And what I realized was inside me, I was looking for that fresh start. Because, right, all through school, all through college, September always meant a fresh start. No matter how messed up how many assignments you did the night, I'm gonna do it differently this time, or I'm gonna stay up, not get behind on my assignments and blah 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 blah, right? And I suddenly realized when you work until you like change jobs, you don't get a fresh start. It just keeps going. And you don't get to drop everything you were doing and start all. And that was a huge adjustment for me. I wasn't expecting to feel that. Like in my head, I knew, but that was a real thing I had to notice was going, yeah, what's a new year? I love that. Thank you, Isaiah. The academic, the flow of the year in college different from the flow of the year um, in the workplace. Yeah, so exactly there. September, very hard. So the sense of progression. Oh, that's very interesting, Michael. Yeah, getting regular feedback, working towards a clear goal. These are all things that are going on inside the person, making that adjustment to this new phase of their life. So thank you. Very good, insightful observations there. So, what we tried to do here is take just one example and talk about the internal transition starting before the event and continuing after. Now, we've already said that change can be anticipated or unanticipated. It can also take place in a moment in time or be gradual. So, for instance, many of the examples we came up with were a specific moment in time, right? One moment you're living in an apartment, the next day you move into your new home, okay? But the external change can also be gradual, such as changes in your field or industry. You kind of have a sense like things are changing in your field, and then you start hearing more, and people start talking, and your professional association starts having webinars, and suddenly you're like, oh, artificial intelligence seems to be in the news a lot more, and I wonder how that's going to affect my field and my career and my future and my plans. So change, as I said, can be a moment in time or gradual. It can also be a non-event. So what's a non-event? Well, a non-event is something you wanted or assumed was going to happen, but it never happens. And so an example, this might be the promotion you were expecting that you didn't get. Or for some people, they just expected at some point they would get married, and that hasn't happened yet in their life. So externally, nothing has changed. But internally, there's a sense of being unsettled, of dissatisfaction, disappointment, maybe even grief, real loss, because that non-event, that event you were expecting hasn't happened. Also, change can be a chronic hassle, something that happens over time, becomes more and more irritating, okay? What's an example of that? A long commute to work. At first, you don't mind it, okay? Because you're excited about the new job and all the adjustments and being a bigwig and all that. But after a while, that really starts to irritate you. An unreasonable supervisor, a high workload. And this might go on a long time, but eventually you start to think about making a change. And so a growing dissatisfaction with the way the company is being managed might be another example of a chronic hassle. And then lastly, we can say that a change is voluntary or involuntary. So voluntary means it's something that you wanted, that you chose. Involuntary means it's something that happened to you, that was imposed on you. So several of you talked about being laid off. That's involuntary, okay? Something imposed on you versus choosing to leave an employer would be voluntary. Now we have a special name for things that are unanticipated and involuntary. So we weren't anticipating it and we didn't want it, and we call that a crisis, a life crisis, okay? So just some different ways of thinking about the kinds of change that we experience throughout our life. So we're going to move on now and talk about the phases of transition that Bridges discusses in his books. So every transition involves moving from some current situation or former situation into a new situation. And we're going to talk about what happens in each of these phases. And Bridges calls these endings, neutral zone, and beginnings. So in the endings phase, we have to let go of the current or former situation that we're still tied to. And this is really key. Every transition begins with an ending. We have to let go of the old thing or the old situation before we can pick up the new one. And a key step here, often overlooked. Why? Because we want to move on, okay? As quickly as possible to avoid all those yucky feelings, all right? So a key step that's crucial but often overlooked is to name the losses. So let's start thinking about those of you who are between jobs, okay? What we typically say unemployed. You've been laid off or you resigned or left a job. So go ahead and use the chat and ask the question, what has this person lost? What have you lost if that's your situation? Yep, so paycheck, definitely financial. Identity, yes. Social connection, sense of purpose, yes. Benefits, routine, yes. Structure, daily communication with people, regular contact with people. Yes, those social connections, doing meaningful work, kind of getting that payback, that feedback that's internal to us, that what I do really matters and is meaningful here. Yeah, having a clear role, expertise, right? You were known in that organization as having expertise and skills and gifts and abilities in a certain way. Stability, yes, yes. These are all losses that we experience when we're between jobs, most definitely. Um, so yes, financial income, health insurance, okay, your identity. I was the director of such and such. Now I'm unemployed. Who am I now, right? And if we really tie our feelings about ourselves to our job title, that can be a real crisis. So the structure, that's a big one. The structure of the week, the structure of the quarter, the structure of the day, okay? Yeah, definitely identity, I would say. Relationships with in the workplace, your status, your reputation, your status as others look at you, as well as you look at yourself. Your self-confidence can take a big hit. And again, some of you mentioned having something that gives you a sense of purpose, that provides feedback, gives you a sense of accomplishments. A loss of professional connections. So if someone has not built a network outside of their organization, when they're laid off or they leave, they lose their entire professional network. And this is why I really encourage all my career clients to identify and become active in their local professional association, because then your network extends beyond just the organization that you were previously working in. So validation and value. Yes, another loss, Kermit. Most definitely. And we feel these things acutely. As I said, there's a whole range of emotions tied to this: anger, shame, maybe relief, grief, confusion. And as I said, this endings phase is one that a lot of people want to skip right over. I just want to jump into getting to the new thing as quickly as possible. Okay. But we have some important work to do in the endings phase. So we need to name the losses. We need to acknowledge the emotions without judging them. I'm bad, I'm ungrateful, I'm weak, I'm whatever. No, just this is what I'm feeling. Separate your identity from your title. So in our culture, when you meet someone, what's typically the first question you ask them? What do you do? And our identity is so tied to the work we do and to our title that when we are no longer in that role, we start to question, well, who am I really? Okay. And we have to let go of some things, how things used to be, how it should have gone, how they should have treated me. Here's another one. We have to let go of, is there anything I could have done differently to prevent this? And that's a question that really plagues people. And the truth is, you might be able to learn a thing or two, but in a lot of cases, we don't have a good answer, and we just have to let go of that and move on. So all of this stuff takes time. Okay, how much time? Well, more than a day and less than a month is what I would say. So if you find yourself unable to let go and move forward, you may need to find a trusted friend, a career coach, or a therapist to help you process what you experienced. So, what are some of the things that can happen if people don't pay attention to the endings piece? They might be applying to just any job out there without taking the time to get some clarity, or they're trying to recreate the exact old job. Or they may stay stuck emotionally in resentment or fear. Somebody coming from a very toxic work environment, the fear of having that same kind of environment in a future job can totally paralyze the individual. And I have seen all of these, okay, and more with my career coaching clients. And so again, if you're noticing some of these things in yourself, maybe you need to go back and think about the losses and think about the emotion, and ask yourself, what do I need to let go of? So some additional questions that might be helpful. What did this role give you beyond a paycheck? What part of your identity do you want to carry forward, and what do you want to release and let go of? What is it you're grieving? If you were laid off from an organization in a role that were really good fit, you loved what you were doing, you loved the people, you loved the mission, right? There is such a tremendous sense of loss. Or, if you just thought, oh, I'm going to be here till I retire, and that doesn't happen. I've had many clients in that situation. There is real grief there to be processed. All right, now let's talk about those of you who are currently employed and doing a job, either thinking about making a job change, you've decided to seek a new role, you're actively seeking a new role. What is it you need to let go of? Let's see. Put your thoughts in the chat here. It's a little harder to think about, isn't it? So you're still in a job, but you're in the process of, on the inside, opening up, being preparing for moving to a new role. Yeah, you need to let go that this job that you're currently in defined you. Letting go of your identity in the current role. Yep. I am more than just this particular role. So yeah, fear, nervousness about making the jump. So even if the current situation isn't great, right? The familiar is more comfortable than the unknown. Yep. Any other thoughts? Yeah, the comfort, I know how to do this. So exactly. When I left the university that I'd worked at for 13 years, there were some things I had to give up. I had to give up the belief or hope that things would go back to the way they had been, because there had been a lot of big changes over a number of years. I had a particular project that I started at the university, and I had a goal for that project, and I had to let go of that. I had to recognize that it was never going to happen given the current situation at that particular school. I also had to recognize that things had already changed. Things I had no control over had changed. Even the perception of the value of my role had changed. And I had to let go of that. And eventually, I had to let go of what I thought my next role was going to look like, so I could be open to an option that I hadn't even considered. So thank you all for sharing from some of your own experience, those of you who are currently in a role but looking to make a change. So letting go of the known self, right? So your current identity, your current sense of competency, all those kinds of things. Acknowledging the fear of becoming a learner or going through, that stage when you're in a new role of having to soak it all in and learn new things. Accepting that growth often requires temporary incompetence. Okay. Just what we want to know about ourselves, that we're temporarily incompetent. Letting go of the psychological contract, right? If I work hard, this organization's going to reward me in these ways. They're going to take care of me. They're going to keep me or whatever. Okay. So sometimes the disappointment is subtle. The promotion didn't happen. The culture shifted. Leadership changed. The values of the organization seem to have shifted, and they're no longer values that I'm in alignment with. You may need to let go of kind of assumptions about loyalty, okay? Some people feel much stronger loyalty to their employer than others. And you may need to let go of the belief that staying equals stability. So when I moved to England for 3 years, I was working for the DuPont company. And people were telling me, why would you want to leave a stable job like that? Blah, blah. When I came back 3 years later, the building I had worked in that housed several hundred employees was empty. That entire department had been dismantled. There was no stability there either. Okay. So letting go of allowing you to recognize the disappointment that you might have. The psychological contract isn't working or didn't work. You might have to let go of the comfort of not deciding, right? We already said here, right? Staying employed allows, well, I'll get around to that someday, okay? The things aren't that bad. I'll deal with it later. It feels risky to even consider making a move here. So on the inside, you might need to give yourself permission to explore, recognizing that not deciding is also a decision. And so I think somebody mentioned it in the chat, tolerating the anxiety of moving forward. All right. So you're going to unsettle yourself by considering making a change, letting go of how others see me. So an employee job seeker may fear being seen as disloyal or damaging relationships or disappointing mentors. Okay. And you may have to let go of that way that others perceive you that you feel really good about. So I'm seen as the reliable anchor. Okay. I'm seen as the subject matter expert in something. You need to let go of that in order to move on. And so maybe on the inside, you need to rethink what career mobility means and accept that growth might disappoint some other people. And the other thing, let go the old narrative, what you've been telling yourself, right? What are some of the things you might have told? This is going to be my field forever. Okay. This is the ladder I'm climbing. This is what success looks like. You may need to let go of that ladder, those linear career assumptions. Some people still have those kinds of careers, but many, many, many of us don't. Okay. You may need to let go of external definitions of success and really ask yourself what success means to you. And on the inside, again, revise your own definition of success, revisit that, and grieve the imagined future that won't happen. So again, you may have imagined what your future in that particular organization might look like, and you realize it's not going to happen. But that will free you then to move on to other possibilities. So a couple other things about currently employed, you may feel guilt instead of grief, more sense of restlessness instead of crisis. Again, more of a dissatisfaction instead of a major rupture, something that, immediate that breaks and forces you into change. But you're still talking about ending something before you can move on, even though you're still at the job. It's a real challenge sometimes to continue to be working in the job and thinking about moving on, because again, the transition has started, but you still have to be giving your all to the job. So that can be quite a challenge. So you don't have to lose a job to experience transition. Sometimes the ending's internal, when you realize you have outgrown a role, a culture, or a particular version of yourself. So there's some questions here for those currently employed. I'm not going to go through them. They'll be in the slide deck when you get that, but some things that might be helpful. All right, so now we're going to talk about what William Bridges calls the neutral zone. And I have no idea why he calls it that, because it does not feel neutral at all when you're in it. In fact, it's a time of uncertainty, because nothing is definite in the neutral zone. Nothing feels solid or certain. Some might say, I feel kind of lost or kind of empty. It can feel confusing, but it's also the place of greatest creativity and potential. It's a place where innovation and growth takes place because nothing is solidified. Nothing is definite. This is the space to reassess what you're leaving behind, adjust your identity or your self-concept, how you view yourself, and explore new approaches. It's a time of fear and a time of freedom. For many people, this is the most uncomfortable phase of transition. It's also the most creative and the most liberating. Because again, nothing is definite, nothing is solid. There's a lot of possibilities. So there may be ambiguity or self-doubt. There might be impatience, even fatigue, but there might also be unexpected insight. Things you learn about yourself because you've opened yourself up to possibilities. And so these are some of the things going on when you're in the neutral zone. Bridges calls this fertile but disorienting. Now that sounds appealing, doesn't it? You're networking, but you don't really have traction. You're questioning your direction. Everything's up for grabs. You're reconsidering what you actually want. Your confidence fluctuates week to week or day to day or hour to hour. Okay? Guess what? This is all normal. You are not the crazy one. This is part of what transition is about when you're in the neutral zone. So tolerating uncertainty and ambiguity without rushing to closure. Many of us are uncomfortable with uncertainty, and so we'd rather have closure than live with that uncertainty until we see an opportunity that is really the one we want to go after. It's a time to experiment, talking to people in roles that potentially interest you, building new skills and knowledge, making small pivots, redefining success beyond the offer received. What do I mean by that? Well, if success for you is I've got an offer in hand, then guess what? You're going to be unsuccessful most of the time. Well, that's discouraging. So what other things could you use to define success during the job search? Okay. Number of networking meetings per week. Okay. Completing a certification. Deciding to get more involved in your professional association and doing that. Those kinds of things are things that you have control over and that you can measure success by. And then we talked about the loss of structure. So rebuilding that daily structure, that weekly structure as well. So it's in this neutral zone where career clarity develops if you stay engaged rather than panicking. And if you find yourself panicking, you may want to consider a career coach. To they can be a safe person with whom you can process both the internal and external elements of the job search. Sometimes family members are too close to you and to the effects that the transition is having on the family to be that safe place to process stuff. Sometimes it can be a good friend or a networking or job search support group. And I'll provide a couple of those at the end here. So you're working on getting clarity about your value proposition, okay? Where do my strengths and experience, how do those then result in me being, what kind of problems can I solve for an organization? How can I make money? How can I save money? Getting clarity about that. Having a coherent professional narrative. What do I mean by that? Everybody has a story. Okay. What's your story? What is the theme that runs throughout your life, throughout your professional career? So, for instance, for myself, okay, my first 5 years after Northwestern, I worked as a wastewater engineer for DuPont. Then I got into organizational development work, then into career coaching, then into alumni relations. And now I'm actually doing some case management for a nonprofit organization. And you're like, my gosh, Deborah, you're all over the place. But what I realized at some point is that the overall theme that runs through all of that is I am motivated to make a positive impact and create lasting change. So what is your coherent professional story? What pulls it all together for you? Your confidence that it becomes more grounded, not forced. Okay. All three of these things are signs that you are making progress in the neutral zone. Clarity and confidence and that coherent narrative are coming through. So here's a few questions to ask yourself when you're in the neutral zone. Okay. Again, this will be in the slides. Not going to spend a lot of time on these assumptions that you're challenging. What are you learning about yourself? And if you think of this as a season of personal and professional development rather than a problem to be solved, what might be developing in you? Hooray! We're going into the new situation. Woohoo! All right. Well, we have the new beginning. We have a job offer. We accept the offer. Well, we negotiate salary, then we accept the job offer, and we begin. But the new situation isn't just the new job, right? It's the shift in the identity. It's the internal alignment that's shifted. So the new role is an intentional re-entry into professional identity. And re-entry means choosing how you show up, right? What are the old patterns that you want to do differently, that you want to change? Your networking, the language you use, your boundaries are going to reflect this new direction. So a beginning becomes real when you actively embody it, not when you wait to be validated by others. You're not returning to the workforce as who you were. You're entering as to who you become. So a beginning requires internal alignment before there's external success. And the healthiest beginnings often reflect lessons that we learned in the neutral zone. So having better boundaries. Okay. I've learned what drains me, and I'm not going to let that come into the next chapter of my life, or I'm going to manage it better. More aligned role selection. So I'm not going to perform a version of myself that isn't sustainable. The role I'm moving into is more aligned with my skills that I enjoy using, the ones that I thrive in. The environment is going to be one that brings out the best in me. This new is more aligned with who I am and how I best contribute. And clearer priorities. I'm going to stop chasing everything and start choosing certain things deliberately. So priorities are about deciding what you're going to focus on and what you're going to let go of. So I hear you saying out there, yes, I hear it. You're saying, oh, Deborah, that's all very interesting. But how do I actually manage the transition? So let's go into some specifics. First of all, particularly if you've been laid off or whatever, you've got some immediate practicalities around finances and around talking with your family and building support. Okay. So what happens if somebody doesn't deal with these things? Just put your thoughts in the chat. Oh, Jeremy Hunter calls it the messy middle. Yeah, that's better than the neutral zone. I like that. Thank you. Is that Mona? Trying to read small blueprint. Additional stress. Yeah. If you haven't dealt with some of these immediate practicalities, you're going to carry that stress forward, aren't you? Might feel unsettled. Yep, definitely. So yeah, this is, what kind of money benefits, health insurance is going to be available from the previous employer, getting unemployment sorted out, and contacting creditors. Okay. They can often adjust payment plans and things, knowing that yeah, debt, definitely, most definitely. Loss of a job is a significant financial experience for someone, and can have significant repercussions. Family, so family needs to be support to you, but you also need to recognize they probably can't be your only support. Um, and so who do you already have, or who can you bring into your life that can be a support to you through this? Going to be really, really crucial. And again, a career coach, a therapist, a job search networking or support group can be really, really helpful. All right, so let's look at the next strategy. We already talked about this, but I'm going to mention it briefly again, naming the losses, okay? And sometimes the loss, okay, is that we just don't know if we could have prevented this from happening. Sometimes, we've talked about a lot of the losses, whether you are between jobs or you're currently employed. We could also, if you're returning to the workforce, a number of you are returning after a career break of some kind. So there's going to be losses there. When I went from having my private practice at home with my son growing up, and then I moved into working 3 days a week and then full time at a university, there were some things I lost. I lost a lot of flexibility in my schedule. I lost the opportunity to do some volunteer work that was very meaningful. Okay. And so recognizing what the losses are, no matter your situation, really, really important. Accepting your emotions. We've talked about this. You may have a wide range of emotions, and try and name them. So I'm angry. Well, irritated, right, is very different from enraged. Okay. And so try and give those feelings names. Maybe write them down. Okay. And you may find a safe person to talk to. You may find yourself crying or journaling. Any way that helps you kind of recognize them and process them and then move beyond them. Sometimes a current loss, our reaction to it is actually more tied to losses we've had in the past. And so if that's happening, it's going to be really important to recognize that, or it's going to paralyze you in the present. Eventually these strong emotions begin to, we experience them less frequently, less intensely. Although they may occasionally pop up at times that surprise us. That's part of being human. Okay. Um, so it's really important to realize, like when you're going on an interview, that what you're feeling on the inside is going to affect that interview, whether you want it to or not. And so if you're still resenting the last employer, okay, or if you're doubting your capabilities, that is going to affect that interview, no matter how hard you try to hide it. So having people in your life that can support and validate you is really, really critical. Address the committee in your head. Now, what on earth do you mean by that, Deborah? Well, I'm talking about that inner dialogue that goes on in your brain. Okay. I often call them the voices, right? So I like to imagine a conference table in a room, and something happens. I get an email that says, we're not going to consider you for the position. And you thought you were very qualified. You were really interested in this. You were so excited about it. And then the voices come. Okay. And one person at the table says, maybe you're not as qualified as you think. And another voice says, are you ever going to land a position? And another voice says, well, maybe you should adjust your job search strategy. And another voice says, you're really disappointed. Maybe you need to go do something like totally unrelated to the job search for the rest of the day. But you know what? You can keep going because you're more than just this. So you need to, instead of saying, I'm not going to listen to those, right? They are going to influence you and how you feel about yourself and how you move forward. Pay attention to what they're saying. Listen to what the voices are saying. And then ask yourself, which of these do I want to leave at my table talking to me? And which of these do I need to say, it's time for you to leave? You are not being helpful. You're telling me lies. You're telling me untruths. So let's ask the question here. What happens if we don't pay attention to the voices, the committee in your head? What can happen? Use the chat. Again, this is a little harder question maybe than some of the others. Unconsciously get in your way. Yeah, most definitely. Yep. Spiraling. Yep. Jump into in a situation that you're not aligned with. Yep. Just to have that security again. Mm-hmm. And you may have competing voices in your head and really, feels like there's just this battle going on inside of you. Any other thoughts on what can happen if we don't pay attention and deal with? Yeah, not taking action, getting stuck in the feelings. Yeah, definitely. If you feel devastated every time you get thanks for your application, but we're not going to consider you. The way the job market is right now, you're going to spend most of your time, right? Feeling pretty rotten. So recognize what the voices are saying and decide which ones you're going to dismiss from your table. Yeah, miss opportunity. Join the press. Yeah, negative judgment. Oh, yeah, negative judgments. Yes, yes, yes. Those voices are so strong, aren't they? Do we want them sitting at our table? Are they being helpful? I don't think so. Maybe you want somebody saying, is there anything you can learn from this? No, I don't think so. All right, then move on. Okay, great. Keeping watching our time here. So this is a time to develop new knowledge, skills, and attitudes when you're in a job search transition. You may want to, you may need to, or you may choose to. Okay. So maybe you recognize there's a skills gap or knowledge gap between the experience that you have and the kind of roles that you're going for. And so you're going to work on ways to fill that gap. Every single person out there needs to be asking the question, how is artificial intelligence affecting my industry, affecting my field? And what are the implications of that? And if you don't know, then this is a good time to begin to see who in my field, in my industry, is talking about this. And what are they saying? And nobody really knows, right? The answer to that question. But it's important to be aware of what the conversation is. What are your trends in the field? How is it changing? Um, and who are the thought leaders? And are you reading and are you following them? And a lot of this you can include on your resume. Okay. So if you want some suggestions on how to include that in your resume and LinkedIn profile, just email me. I can send you an example of how to include some of this right up there on the resume. Okay, let's really this next one. Attend to what replenishes you. What on earth does that mean? Well, I can't say that I've met anyone that loves the job search process. There might be aspects you enjoy, but for the most part, it tends to drain and deplete you. And so, what's going to fill you up? Okay. What kinds of activities? Maybe it's being with people, maybe it's reading a book on your own. Okay. Maybe it's refreshing your body, maybe it's refreshing your mind. Whatever it is, very important to be sure you're doing things that replenish you. And then lastly, letting go. So, what is it time to let go of? Is it an attitude you have, a belief you have? A goal or dream you had for the future? Is it something in your self-image? Is it a habit? What is it that you need to let go of? Joseph Campbell says, we must be willing to get rid of the life we planned so we can have the life that is waiting for us. All right, a couple resources. These will be included in the email that Caitlin's sending out. The first two are job search networking groups. North Shore is one that's close to those of you in the Chicago area. And many of their programs are online, so it doesn't really matter where you're located. And then the second one is a Philadelphia-based group that I'm very familiar with. But again, almost many of their programs are online or virtual, and so it doesn't matter where you're located. And you are certainly welcome to contact me for career coaching. If you're interested in finding a career coach that specializes in something or is located near you, uh, the email will include this link to a searchable database at the National Career Development Association. So, Caitlin, we have a few minutes here for some questions.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions that you want to submit to the chat or the Q&A, please feel free to. I haven't seen any come through just yet. But please, if you have something you'd like to ask Deborah, let us know.
Okay.
And while we're waiting for some questions to come in, just a quick reminder that we will be sending out the slide deck, as Deborah has mentioned, in a PDF format. We'll be sending out the recording. And if there are any lingering questions, I know, Deborah, if you want to go to your next slide with your contact information, we can have that up too. She's shared her LinkedIn if you'd like to connect with her, as well as her email address to reach out if you have any follow-up questions for her.
And that'll
All
be in
right.
the email as well.
Exactly. Yes, we will be sending all of that out. All right. Well, I'm not seeing anything come through at this point, but I really wanted to thank everyone for joining us today, and a huge thank you to you, Deborah. This was a wonderful presentation. And again, we'll be following up hopefully tomorrow with all these resources that we've mentioned for you to kind of take an even deeper dive on this fantastic content. And if you want to find out about more alumni events, including other career webinars, please check out the NAA's website at alumni.northwestern.edu. I hope you all have a great rest of your day and go Cats!
Okay.